Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into part 2 of our epic explainer. We're going to trace a massive, continuous, 600-year chain reaction of human history. Think of it kind of like a giant line of dominoes, right? One monumental shift tips over the next, taking us all the way from the dawn of the Renaissance, straight through the scientific and industrial revolutions, the world wars, and right up into the complexities of our modern age. It's a fast-paced, wild ride of exactly how we got to where we are right now.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with rebirth and discovery, move into the Age of Reason, then industry and imperialism, the world at war, and finally, our modern world.
All right, part 1, rebirth and discovery, the spark of momentum.
So, our very first domino falls right around the 1440s, and man, it is a period of breathtaking, really dual-sided progress. On one hand, you've got Johannes Gutenberg inventing the movable type printing press. This is hands down one of the most vital inventions in human history. It totally rewired how the world communicated, spreading ideas like wildfire. But at the exact same time, this era marks the sobering beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. By 1492, Columbus sails to the Americas, which bridges oceans and kicks off massive global colonization. And right on the heels of that, from 1500 to 1600, the Reformation fundamentally shakes up European religion and politics. The world was suddenly, and I mean rapidly, expanding.
Now, you know what's really fascinating here? It's the collaborative nature of this rebirth. The whole cultural explosion we associate with the Italian Renaissance, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Classical knowledge was actually meticulously preserved by Muslim scholars, brilliant minds like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd. They safeguarded ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, math, and medicine. And that preserved foundation is exactly what allowed Renaissance innovators, guys like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, to adapt ancient styles and push them even further. They brought a brand new humanism to life, creating these stunning three-dimensional artworks using totally new techniques of perspective.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Age of Reason, Reason and Rebellion.
Because think about it, once you change your perspective in art, you naturally start changing your perspective on, well, everything else. And this perfectly illustrates the massive paradigm shift of the scientific revolution. For literally centuries, humanity operated under Ptolemy's geocentric view. That was the comforting but completely incorrect belief that Earth sat right dead center in the universe. But then, thinkers like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo actually looked to the skies and proved the heliocentric reality, that the Earth and the planets revolve around the sun. This wasn't just some minor scientific update. It was a profound, earth-shattering shift in how we understood our literal place in the cosmos.
And naturally, once you start applying that kind of systematic, empirical logic to map the stars, it's only a matter of time before you apply that same rigorous reason to human society itself. And that brings us to the Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke started championing this revolutionary concept of natural rights. That's the idea that all people are born with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. This was absolutely explosive. I mean, it meant that a ruler's power wasn't absolute or handed down by God, but actually depended on a social contract with the people.
Look at how cleanly these dominoes connect. Step 1. The scientific revolution establishes reason in the scientific method. Think Isaac Newton dropping his laws of motion back in 1686. Step 2. Enlightenment philosophers take that scientific reason and apply it to society. You've got folks like Montesquieu writing about the separation of government powers. And then, Step 3, these philosophies jump right off the page and ignite actual real-world political revolutions. You get George Washington leading American forces to independence, the massive eruption of the French Revolution in 1789, and Haiti winning its independence in 1804. Ideas were physically redrawing a map of the world.
Moving right along to Section 3, industry and imperialism, the gears of progress.
So as the political map is shifting, the actual way humans lived and worked was about to undergo its most drastic transformation yet, the Industrial Revolution. We see this massive, sweeping migration from agrarian farm life straight into dense urbanization. And central to all of this is the factory system. This meant concentrating industry into huge buildings where workers performed discrete, repetitive tasks on giant machines. Fueled by innovations like James Watt's steam engine, society fundamentally fractured into brand new economic classes: the bourgeoisie, factory owners who were amassing insane wealth, and the proletariat, the wage earners working in these factories, honestly, often in pretty dreadful conditions. Now, let's look at how this builds, because those factories, they have an insatiable hunger.
First, industrialization demands raw materials to feed the machines, plus new markets to sell all those mass-produced goods. This directly triggers step 2. European nations start competing fiercely to conquer overseas colonies. A really stark example of this is the 1884 Berlin Conference, where European powers literally carved up the entire continent of Africa among themselves. And this unchecked expansion leads us directly to step 3. Intense nationalism and the heavy militarism required to defend these vast competing global empires pushed the world right to the brink. And the acceleration of this era is just staggering. Imperial land grabs at the 1884 Berlin Conference create this massive powder keg. Fast forward to 1914, and that powder keg is sparked by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, triggering the catastrophic First World War. And then, just 2 decades after that conflict concludes, 2 decades, the invasion of Poland in 1939 ignites an even more devastating Second World War.
Which brings us to Section 4, the world at war, cataclysm.
We're now entering some of the darkest chapters of this historical chain reaction. During World War I, the exact same factories that had been built to mass-produce things like textiles, steamships, and railway parts, well, they were repurposed. Now they were manufacturing devastating weapons of mass destruction. This industrialized warfare brought the world trench warfare, rapid-fire machine guns, lethal poison gas, and tanks. The sheer scale of destruction was something humanity had literally never possessed the capacity to unleash before.
When the fighting finally stopped, the peace that followed was incredibly fragile and highly punishing. The Treaty of Versailles demanded heavy reparations. That means money paid to compensate for the harm caused by the war. The Allied powers basically forced Germany to pay billions, assigning blame and placing really severe limits on their military and their territory. And as we know, these harsh financial and political terms sowed some incredibly deep seeds of resentment and instability.
And this directly led to the collapse of the Weimar Republic. You see, the bitter aftermath of the war, compounded by the crushing economic devastation of a global depression, created this incredibly desperate environment. It paved the way for the rise of totalitarianism and fascism, empowering dictators like Adolf Hitler in Germany and Benito Mussolini in Italy. What we're looking at here is a direct, unbroken line of cause and effect, from the end of the first global conflict right to laying the groundwork for the next one.
The resulting clash, World War II, remains the deadliest conflict in human history. It was the ultimate tragic collision of massive industrialization and extreme nationalism. It engulfed the entire globe, spanning Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It brought about unparalleled horrors, including the Holocaust and the targeted murder of millions of civilians, large-scale civilian bombing campaigns by the Allies and Axis alike, and ultimately the deployment of atomic bombs. This was a technology that forever altered the stakes of human warfare.
Moving to our final section, Section 5, our modern world, the global web.
The ashes of that global conflict essentially birthed the incredibly complex, interconnected era we're living in today. In the post-war era, the globe was split between 2 surviving superpowers with deeply, fundamentally opposing ideologies. You had the United States championing a democratic and capitalist model, while the Soviet Union drove a communist model built entirely on collectivization and state control. This dynamic completely defined the Cold War, locking the world into a nuclear arms race where this terrifying doctrine of mutually assured destruction kept a very uneasy, fragile peace.
So, the crucial point to understand here is that while the superpowers were engaged in this cold standoff, the rest of the map was being radically redrawn. Following the creation of the United Nations in 1945, we see the rapid fall of the old European colonial empires. Just look at the timeline. In 1947, India gains independence and is partitioned. In 1948, the nation of Israel is established. In 1949, Mao Zedong establishes the People's Republic of China. This massive wave of decolonization created dozens of newly independent nations, laying down the incredibly complex geopolitical groundwork of our modern map.
And that brings us right to the 21st century, an era defined by some truly incredible heights. Because of that scientific foundation laid down hundreds of years ago, we've celebrated some spectacular triumphs. I mean, we have totally eradicated deadly diseases like smallpox and rinderpest. We've made massive leaps in HIV treatment and are working on potential vaccines. And we have expanded our reach so far beyond this planet, literally sending rovers to explore Mars and retrieving lunar samples from the moon. It's amazing stuff.
But of course, those historical dominoes are still falling. And our modern interconnectedness brings unprecedented challenges too. Today, we're facing the existential threat of climate change, the deep economic shifts caused by rapid globalization, massive global migration, refugee crises, and ongoing regional conflicts. The reality is, the very tools and industries that built our modern world have also created the exact problems we now have to unite to solve.
From Gutenberg's printing press all the way to rovers driving across the surface of Mars, human history is nothing but a relentless, unbroken chain reaction. Every single idea, every invention, and every conflict has directly shaped the ground we're standing on today. So, as we face the monumental challenges of tomorrow, we have to ask ourselves, in this ongoing story, what's going to be the next domino to fall? And maybe more importantly, how will we choose to push it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.